So, welcome to What's Up Over Edmonton for the month of December 2023. My name's Jeff Robertson, and I'm a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada Edmonton Centre. And this is a picture I took earlier in November of the waning crescent moon and Venus, fairly close together, and I overexposed the moon so I could get some of the earth shine, and you can see some of the features on the moon in this picture. I call this What's Up Over Edmonton because the skies where we live at 53 degrees north latitude are fundamentally different than what's presented in most popular astronomy publications like Sky and Telescope and Astronomy Magazine, and also what's presented on the media like the Weather Channel and this guy that comes on CBC radio every now and again. And the example I always use is this. This is the sky over Toronto on July the 5th at 11 o'clock, and I always point out the constellation Scorpio, the Scorpion, fully above the horizon from tip of his stinger to the top of his head, where in Edmonton at that same time, all we ever see is the top of the Scorpion. We never see its stinger. It's also it's not only what we can see, but how we see things. This is a picture I took last February of the moon, Jupiter, and Venus. You can see they're at a tilt with the moon at the top left and Venus at the bottom right. The same day, my wife's cousin, who is in Buenos Aires, Mexico, took a picture of the same scene with the moon at the top, Venus at the bottom, but they're in a straight line because the angle of the ecliptic further down at 20 degrees north latitude is quite a bit steeper than it is here where we live. Most of the information I use comes out of the Observer's Handbook, which is put out by the RASC every year. It is 352 pages of just about anything the observer would want to know. And the 2024 edition arrived in my mailbox earlier this month, and it has a lovely picture of Mars on the cover. So you'll see that next month. So what do we got in December? I was going to have something about cold and blizzards, but because we haven't got any snow yet, I took a line from the song Try to Remember from the show The Fantastics. Deep in December, it's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to go skiing or tobogganing. They're hoping the snow will follow and help Santa's sleigh get around. The Gemini meteor shower peaks on December the 14th. We have the winter solstice on December the 21st. We have another meteor shower, the Ursid meteor shower, which peaks on the 23rd. We have our last good evening views of Saturn for a while. And Venus is still bright in the morning sky, and with the sun not coming up until after 8:30. And I know the schools in my neighborhood open up at 8:30, so I'm sure the kids are enjoying views of Venus as they head off to school early in the morning. So I'll start the planetarium portion, and as always, I have pre-recorded it. Let's have a look at what's in the skies over Edmonton in December, and as always, we'll start with sunrise and sunset times. So December 1st, the sun rises at 8:27 a.m., it sets at 4:18 p.m. for 7 hours and 51 minutes of sunlight. Night begins, that is, astronomical twilight ends at 6:26. On December 31st, New Year's Eve, the sun rises at 8:50. It sets at 4:23 for 7 hours and 33 minutes of sunlight, and night begins at 6:34. Let's look at the evening planets. We'll start with Mercury. Mercury starts the month very, very low in the southwest sky. It never really gets very high in Edmonton. This is the view on around the 11th, and it only gets about 2 degrees above the horizon 45 minutes after sunset. Very tough target to see. Reaches inferior conjunction, that is, it crosses in front of the sun on the 22nd and moves into the morning sky. Moving on to the outer planets, the first one on the ecliptic we come to is Saturn. Saturn is setting at 10:59 at the beginning of the month and 9:14 at the end of the month. This is the last good month to see Saturn. It's going to be fairly low in the evening sky. It's going to be in all the muck and haze that hugs the horizon. So this is the last good time to see Saturn for several months. It still presents a lovely view with its ring. The last few weeks at our observatory in Coronation Park, people have come in to me saying they've been seeing stories that Saturn's rings are going to be disappearing. This is stuff the media is trumpeting. Saturn's rings to disappear in a couple of years. And I've talked about that on previous issues of What's Up. Yeah, they're going to disappear from view from Earth because the tilt of the rings is going to get narrower and narrower until they're edge on and they'll disappear. But that only lasts a few months, and that happens in the spring of 2025. And then they'll reappear again. The headline is just clickbait. When you read the article, which a lot of people don't apparently, it does explain what's going on. The rings are not disappearing. They will be back. Next we come to Neptune, the farthest planet from the Sun. At the beginning of the month, Neptune is setting at 1:20. By the end of the month, it's setting at 11:29. And in a telescope, it presents us with this blue disk. Quite small, but the blue color is definitely visible in a mid to large size telescope. Not so much in binoculars. It'll just be a point of light. Next we come to Jupiter, the king of the planets, the largest planet in our solar system. It is well placed for several months yet. It sets at 5:24 in the morning at the beginning of the month and 3:19 in the morning at the end of the month. It shines very brightly, very obvious, and through a telescope we can see at least two of the dark equatorial bands on the planet and all four of the Galilean moons. And here on December 11th at 8 o'clock we have Callisto, Europa, and Io on one side of the planet and Ganymede on the other. And if we just skip ahead a day, have them changing position. Europa is actually in front of the planet right now at this time. Let's just zoom right in here. You can see Europa. We can watch Europa transit across the planet. Let's just run this here at 300 times power. You can see Io moving in behind the planet, and there comes Europa's shadow. It's because the planet is moved in its orbit, the shadow is not almost directly underneath the planet anymore, but it's off to the side. And that's just because our point of view of Jupiter has changed over the last month. And last we come to Uranus. And in this representation, it looks like a pale blue disk. It's actually more aquamarine or turquoise. I was looking at Uranus the other night, and it definitely has a bit of a greenish tint to it. Uranus sets at 6:46 in the morning at the beginning of the month and 4:43 at the end. So it is up all night in the evening sky. Going into the morning sky, there's only one planet visible, and that is Venus. Venus at the beginning of the month is rising at 4:14, but it is starting to get a little lower as the month goes by. By the end of the month, it's rising at 5:40. Venus blazes very brightly at magnitude 4.1 at the beginning of the month. Venus starts the month about 8 moon diameters from the bright star Spica in the constellation Virgo, and then throughout the month it moves further and further away. Through a telescope, Venus is a waxing gibbous phase and getting further and further away, getting smaller and smaller. Venus doesn't reach superior conjunction until June. By mid-spring, it's just going to be too close to the Sun to be seen. And it is following this path shown on this chart. Mars is too close to the Sun to be seen this month. Looking at the Moon, it is near Venus on the 9th. It's new on the 12th and returns into the evening sky. On the 17th, it is near Saturn. On the 18th and 19th, it is passing Neptune. On the 21st and 22nd, it is passing Jupiter. And on the 23rd, it is past Uranus. On Christmas Eve, 96% of the moon will be illuminated, giving Santa lots of light to make his trip. The Geminids peak on the 14th of December. It can be a fairly active meteor shower. Sometimes up to 150 meteors an hour are seen. They're results of the Earth passing through a debris field left behind by an asteroid, 3200 Phaethon. And there is the radiant there. It's near the bright star Castor in Gemini. And it is visible all night. On the 22nd, there's another meteor shower in December, the Ursids. The Ursids are not as productive as the Geminids. They only produce about 10 meteors per hour. And it is a result of the Earth passing through the debris field left behind by comet 8P Tuttle. As with all meteor showers, it's best to get out of town. Wear warm clothing. Take a chair. A gravity chair works great. Take something warm to drink and blankets. You don't need binoculars. You don't need a telescope. You just need your eyes and lay back and watch the show. But the main thing is just to get out of the city, away from the lights. And the radiant point for the Ursids is near the constellation Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, or as it's colloquially known, the Little Dipper. As far as the moon goes, it's not a problem for the Geminids. It's a waning crescent moon, so it's not rising until the early hours of the morning. For the Ursids, it is going to be up for most of the night. December 21st marks the winter solstice, the shortest hours of daylight in the northern hemisphere and the official beginning of winter. In Edmonton, we get 7 hours, 27 minutes, and 39 seconds of daylight. Here in Edmonton, the solstice moment actually occurs at 8:27 p.m. The reason for the solstice, in fact, the reason for the seasons, is the Earth's axial tilt of 23.5 degrees. At the winter solstice point, the North Pole is pointed away from the sun, and the angle of sunlight hitting the northern hemisphere is at its shallowest, which is why we have winter. In Edmonton, the sun rises in the southeast, travels very low across the southern sky, and sets in the southwest. The light at this time of year, the winter light, is very unique. It's a point that's missed in all the Hallmark Christmas movies my wife likes to watch, but they're all filmed in the summer, which is why women are walking in the snow in 5-inch heels and open-toed shoes. Let's look at a few things we can see in the night sky. Looking north, we do see the Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, and I've set the time here for 9 o'clock in the middle of the month. We're losing all the constellations of the summer and fall. There is Cygnus heading west. Lyra with the bright star Vega is fairly low. Hercules is half below the horizon already. And Pegasus, our famous upside-down flying horse, is heading toward the horizon as well. All the real big action is happening in the south. Well, of course, we've got all the planets lined up, but we've got the classic constellations of winter: Taurus, Orion, and Gemini. We have the constellation Taurus, the bull, and this beautiful star cluster, the Pleiades, also known as M45. Pleiades, or Seven Sisters, is an open star cluster about 400 light years from Earth. To the naked eye, it looks like a little dipper with 6 stars that you can see, and through binoculars you can see dozens of stars, and through a telescope on a dark night you can make out dozens and dozens and dozens of stars. Also in the constellation Taurus, near the lower horn of the bull, is the Crab Nebula M1. And that is a supernova remnant from a star that exploded in 1054. And it was observed by Chinese astronomers. It was also noted by the first peoples here in North America. And there is a rock drawing showing the supernova that created the Crab Nebula. It's also the site where the very first pulsar was discovered. One more object in Taurus is the Hyades star cluster. Similar to the Pleiades, only it's much closer to Earth, and it also contains the bright red star Aldebaran, which is right here. And it's a red giant star about 65 light years from Earth. So if we zoom out and get rid of the lines here, from a dark sight, you can see the Hyades is actually kind of a V-shaped affair, and it contains dozens and dozens of stars, which you can see with binoculars or a small telescope. And I think that's all I'm going to talk about today. There are several other good winter constellations, but I'll save that for next month or maybe the month following. Just a reminder, with the long nights, there's a good possibility that an aurora will pop up. They pop up all year long. It's just with the long nights, it's a better chance of seeing them. Subscribe to aurorawatch.ca, and you can get an alert sent to your email or to your phone when the possibility of an aurora is likely. In the city, an aurora has to be really, really bright to see. But out of town, if you can get away from the city lights, auroras are a lot easier to spot. And so I think that's it for December 2023. That's it for 2023. And I'll ask if there are any questions. Okay. Are there any questions or anything to add from Alistair?
Yeah. Speaking of aurora and tonight and clear skies, there's a very good chance of aurora tonight. The Center for Space Weather prediction is forecasting a G1 class geomagnetic storm. So
Wow.
I just looked at the auroral oval. It's expanding and getting more intense. So yeah, keep an eye out, and we might very well get something a little later this evening.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully I was out putting my garbage can out for tomorrow, and it had clouded over since 6 o'clock. So hopefully that'll clear and we might be able to see something. Okay. Is there anything else for anyone? Okay. We'll go on to the moon.
What do you see when you look at the moon? When it's full and round, do you see a balloon? Does it look like a cookie with the bite taken out? What do you see when you look at the moon? It follows a path.
Okay. I've got this backwards. Dear me. I put my sequency out of sequence. All right. Well, we'll jump ahead to the full moon on the 26th, and it is known as the cold moon. It's also known as the long night moon, the oak moon, the snow moon, the winter maker moon, or the chief moon. I don't know how oak and chief moons came in there, but the other one seems self-explanatory. Okay, third quarter is on December the 5th. The new moon is on the 12th. And first quarter is on the 19th. And for the lunar feature, I pick it out of the RESC Observe the Moon certificate programs for binoculars or telescopes. This one is from the both the binocular and the telescope program. And I will admit that I am starting to recycle some of this stuff because I've done a lot of these. And yeah, anyway. Okay, so we're going to talk about Tycho. Now, last month we looked at the very large and very old crater Clavius. And there it is there, located in the southern highlands. And this month we're going to go 300 kilometers north to where we find the crater Tycho. And this is a photo I took of a 9-day-old moon, and Tycho looks like a pretty ordinary crater. much smaller than Clavius and pretty unassuming. Tycho is a very young crater, relatively speaking, where Clavius is over 3 billion years old. Tycho is a toddler at about 108 million years old. And this is based on samples of ejecta that were picked up by Apollo 17. It's 86 kilometers wide, 4.8 kilometers deep, and it is an easy target in binoculars or a small telescope. And it begins to be seen 9 days after new moon. By day 10, the crater is well illuminated, but it still isn't all that impressive as it is when the moon is full in a few days. The crater was named after Tycho Brahe, who lived from 1546 to 1601, and he was a Danish astronomer and probably the greatest observational astronomer before the invention of the telescope. And he used instruments like the sextant and the quadrant to record the movements of the planets with such precision that his recorded observations were instrumental in his assistant, Johannes Kepler, in writing his 3 laws of planetary motion. And when the moon is full, it's a magnificent sight. It's got a magnificent ray pattern, which is ejecta thrown out when the crater was created, and the sun shining directly down on the moon, and the light is reflecting straight back from that ejecta, which goes almost halfway across the face of the moon. It's much like a traffic sign reflecting your headlights back at you. And there is Tycho there. Very, very obvious. Probably the most obvious thing on the moon when the moon is full. And close-ups taken from lunar orbit by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter shows that the crater does have a prominent central peak. It's about 2 kilometers high and about 15 kilometers across. And this is a view from an angle. And there were thoughts at the time of Apollo from scientists about landing in or near Tycho, but mission planners said there was no way that Apollo was going to Tycho. It was just too far away from the equator of the moon, and they just felt it wasn't safe. Now, if you were going to imagine the full moon with Tycho in the center rather than at the bottom, the crater would look like a giant bullseye, which is probably why Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick chose Tycho to bury TMA-1, the Tycho Magnetic Anomaly 1, or the monolith, inside that crater in 2001: A Space Odyssey. This month's constellation is Auriga, the Charioteer, and this is the star field it resides in. And this is the astronomical drawing. It sits just above Taurus the Bull. And this is a drawing of what the constellation is supposed to represent. Auriga, the Charioteer, is a prominent winter constellation. It has a rough pentagram shape. And the constellation got its name because the major stars form the shape similar to that of a pointed helmet of a charioteer. Auriga was first cataloged by the Greek astronomer Ptolemy in the 2nd century. In Greek mythology, Auriga is often identified with the mythological Greek hero Erytheon, Erytheonius of Athens, who was raised by the goddess Athena. He was credited to be the inventor of the 4-horse chariot, which he used in battle against the usurper Amphictyon, and the battle made Erytheonus the king of Athens. His chariot was created in the image of the sun's chariot, and so Zeus was so impressed with that, he placed him in the heavens. Some of the features of Auriga is Capella. It is the brightest star in the constellation. It is the 3rd brightest star in the northern sky. It is circumpolar in Edmonton. That is, it never sets below the horizon. And 6 months from now, when we're talking about noctilucent clouds, you'll see Capella low in the north in those photos. It's always quite prominent. Capella never sets. To find Capella, you locate the top stars of the Big Dipper and trace a line to the bright star Capella. And although it appears as a single star to the naked eye, Capella is actually a quadruple star system with two pairs of binaries approximately 43 light years away. The primary pair, Capella AA and Capella AB, are two bright yellow giant stars, both of which are around 2.5 times the mass of our own sun. And the secondary pair, Capella H and Capella L, are two faint, cool red dwarfs. Auriga contains 3 Messier objects. They're all open star clusters. There's Messier 36 right there, Messier 37 down there, and Messier 38. And this is a picture of all 3 of the clusters. So Messier 36 is also known as the pinwheel cluster, and it lies about 4,100 light years away, contains at least 60 stars and bears a resemblance to the Pleiades. However, M36 is about 10 times further away than the Pleiades. Messier 37 is the brightest and richest of the open clusters, and it has a magnitude of about 6.2 and lies about 4,500 light years from Earth. And Messier 38, also known as the starfish cluster, lies at a distance of 4,200 light years and has an apparent magnitude of 7.4. It is the faintest of the 3 clusters, and it is invisible to the naked eye. So we'll go on to space history. So this is where we look at a past event that not only occurred in this month, but whose anniversary year is divisible by 5. So for the last time in 2023, we look at events in years ending with 3 or 8. And we're going to 1968. And the race for the moon between the United States and the Soviet Union was still on. The CIA had reported that the USSR was ready to send men around the moon in a matter of months. Throughout 1968, they were using their Proton rocket to send unmanned Zond spacecraft to the moon, which would loop around the far side of the moon and return to Earth. Some failed, but in September and November, Zonds 5 and 6, carrying animal experiments, successfully completed their missions, and a manned flight was probably next. The Zond was a Soyuz spacecraft without an orbital module, modified for a flight to the moon and back, and it would carry a crew of 2. Which brings us to Apollo 8, which was originally going to be the first test of the entire Apollo spacecraft, including the lunar module in Earth orbit. It would also be the first flight of the Saturn V with a crew aboard, and it would be flown by Commander Jim McDivitt, lunar module pilot Rusty Schweigert, and command module pilot Dave Scott. The next crew would fly the same mission, but at a high elliptical orbit. However, the LEM wasn't ready, and it was decided, seeing the LEM would not be ready until spring of 1969, Apollo 8 would fly with the command service module only out to and orbit the moon. McDivitt's crew was offered the flight, but they declined as they had invested so much effort training for the first flight of the lunar module. The flight was then offered to the crew of Apollo 9, and feeling their flight was just a repeat of the previous one, they accepted, and their flight became Apollo 8. And they would be the first men to ride the Saturn V moon rocket, leave Earth orbit, and journey to the moon. The crew was commanded by Frank Borman. He's the guy on the right. The command module pilot was Jim Lovell. He's the guy in the left. Borman and Lovell had set a space endurance record of 14 days in Gemini 7 in 1965. and they had been part of the first space rendezvous with Gemini 6 on that same mission. Lovell also commanded Gemini 12, the last flight in that series with Buzz Aldrin. And the lunar module pilot, the fellow in the center, was Bill Anders. As he was a lunar module pilot without a lunar module, he did much of the photography on the mission. And there they are watching the Saturn V roll out in October to pad 39A, and they were very fashionably dressed, as you can see. On December 21st, Apollo 8 lifted off. After 1.5 orbits using the third stage of the Saturn V, they blasted out of Earth orbit toward a point in space where the moon would be in 3 days. Shortly after leaving Earth orbit, the spacecraft separated from the third stage. They turned around and simulated a docking with it. In this picture here, those dots of light around the rocket stage are ice particles. They're not stars. The crew settled down for a 3-day trip to the moon. They performed engine burns if required and did star sightings, took photos of the rapidly shrinking Earth. Apollo 8 followed what was called a free return trajectory, so that if they didn't go into lunar orbit for whatever reason, the craft would swing behind the moon and return to Earth without additional engine firings. And unlike the cramped Gemini spacecraft, which astronauts described as like being in the front seat of a VW Bug, Apollo was quite roomy, and the astronauts could float around. And this led to some problems with their sense of balance, and Commander Frank Borman became violently space sick for the first part of the flight. Apollo 8 carried a compact, for the time, RCA black and white TV camera that weighed a little over 2 kilograms, and they used it for several broadcasts that were carried live on U.S. networks as well as on the CBC and CTV here in Canada. And you couldn't help but watch them because we only had 2 channels in Edmonton, CFRN on channel 3 and CBXT on channel 5. They would show life aboard the spacecraft, the astronauts working, eating, clowning around. And they also took our picture. Although as the camera lacked a viewfinder, with the telephoto lens on, it was sometimes hard to get the picture just right. And that's why telescopes have finder scopes, folks. It's pretty tough to aim when you have a very narrow field of view. On Christmas Eve, Apollo 8 flew behind the moon, fired its engine, and slowed into lunar orbit 60 miles above the surface. They'd orbit the moon 10 times, each orbit taking 2 hours, and they became the first people to see the lunar far side with their own eyes. And one of the main objectives was to photograph potential future landing sites, particularly what was called Landing Site 2 in the Sea of Tranquility. And this was where the first landing was planned to take place. So the flight was scheduled so the lighting at that site would be the same as when the first lunar landing would occur. On the third orbit, the crew saw the Earth rise above the moon's surface for the first time. They just happened to have the window pointing that way. And this is a photo taken by Bill Anders that would become iconic, and it would inspire the environmental movement. It was said Apollo 8 came to discover things about the moon, but discovered the Earth instead. On the 9th orbit, with the TV camera trained on the moon below them, they made their famous Christmas Eve broadcast, reading the first 10 verses of Genesis and wishing we on Earth a Merry Christmas. To demonstrate some of the gallows humor. At one point, Jim Lovell asked, "Did you guys ever think one Christmas Eve you'd be orbiting the moon?" And Anders replied, "Just hope we're not doing it on New Year's." Early on Christmas Day, Apollo 8 fired its engine once more and headed home. Reestablishing contact after coming out from behind the moon's far side, Jim Lovell radioed, "Roger, please be informed there is a Santa Claus." And there were a few more live broadcasts on the way home. Commentators of the day sternly discussed the narrow window the craft would have to navigate during reentry to avoid skipping off the atmosphere or being burnt to a cinder. And due to the stronger pull of Earth's gravity, the return trip took only 2.5 days. And on December 27th, Apollo 8 hit the Earth's atmosphere at 40,000 kilometers per hour and experienced 8 Gs during the deceleration through the atmosphere. The spacecraft splashed down 3 miles from the aircraft carrier USS Yorkton. The crew of Apollo 8 were named the Time Magazine Men of the Year. Borman retired and went on to head Eastern Airlines. Lovell was named commander of Apollo 13 and is the only man to fly to the moon twice and not land on it. Anders became a special advisor to the president. And until earlier this month, they were the only complete Apollo crew still alive. But sadly, Frank Borman passed away on November 7th. Now, Apollo 8 means a lot to me. And so I'd like to get personal for a few minutes because I followed the events of the space program in the 1960s on TV and radio. But, you know, it was Life magazine that brought it to me in color because, well, color TV came to Canada in the fall of 1966, but we didn't own a color set until October 69. My dad said, I'm watching the hockey in color this year, and that's that, even though my mom was dead set against the idea. But before that, after each mission, I wait the arrival of Life in our mailbox. And coming at the end of the year, the Apollo 8 mission also had 1968 in review. And 1968 was a very, very bad year. And there is the cover of the magazine. I actually have that magazine. The Vietnam War was dragging on for another bloody year. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were murdered. There were riots in the U.S. and other parts of the world. And the Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia in the spring. That was some of the bad news. That wasn't all the bad news. There was a lot of bad news in 1968. But at the end of 1968, there was Apollo 8. And humans traveling to the moon for the first time. And I opened up that copy of Life and saw the now famous photo of our home hanging over the barren moon. I was moved then and I'm moved today. 1968 was a year full of trouble, turmoil, and tears, and it was 366 days long. It was a leap year. The flight of Apollo 8 lasted 147 hours, a little over 6 days of those 366. When the astronauts got back to Houston, Mission Commander Frank Borman received a telegram from someone he'd never met, and it simply read, "You saved 1968." So I'll beg one more indulgence. It's going to take about 5 minutes. I put together a few highlights from videos of the mission. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 pieces. There's the launch, and the audio on the launch is the flight controller's loop, which is something you don't normally hear. The next is live pictures of Earth on the trip out. And as I said before, the camera had no viewfinder. So with the telephoto lens, they had a little trouble finding the Earth. The full sequence goes on for many, many minutes. I pared it down for time. Again, the audio contains the flight director's loop. And the next are onboard recordings of the astronauts when they saw Earthrise for the first time, because there are flight recorders on spacecraft. Next is the astronauts' thoughts about the moon with 16 millimeter movie film of the moon passing below it. And last is a portion of the Christmas Eve message they sent home as the TV camera sent back images as the moon passed below them. And I remember that night very well. So here we go.
Last 10, mark. 9, start ignition. Flame burned, engines armed. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All engines running. Launch commit. Hold up. Roger, clock. That's okay, flight. All engines. Roger. Clock start, flight. Roger, clock. Hold down the conversation. Copy tower. Houston, copy. Flight, we're going the IP. Roger, out. Roger. Flight, we've lost the CP. They're switching. Out and clear. We lost all data. Get out and CP. They're switching machines. Okay, we still have good data then. Econ flight, how are you? Looking good, flight. Follow him, okay. Morale, Astrocom uplink disabled. How you, booster? It looks good, flight. S1C looks good. Roger. Flight report, S1. Mode 1, Bravo, Apollo 8. 1B. Fido, flight, how are you? We're go, flight, right on. Ecom? We're good, flight. GNC? We're good, flight. Booster? Go, flight. Okay, Capcom, we look good. Apollo 8, you're looking good. Yeah, really. Roger. Hello, Houston. This is Apollo 8. We have a television camera pointed directly at the Earth now. Apollo 8, Houston, receiving nothing now. Okay. We're receiving.
We got a picture. That's just
picture. We're just not seeing the
Say
view of
again?
the Earth.
We got a picture as far as sync and all that.
Roger.
Just not in the field of view.
Okay. Okay, we're just picking it up at 3 o'clock on our screen. Okay. It's moving up toward 1 o'clock and in toward the center. Keep it going in that direction. Okay. It's looking better. You're holding up about 1 to 2 o'clock. Looking better. Give us a little more in that same direction. You're down at 3 o'clock now. We see about half of what you see. Too much. It's disappearing at our 5 o'clock. Now it's coming back. It's half off screen at our 2 o'clock. And it's disappeared off to our 3 o'clock. It's coming back in now. It's headed toward the center of our screen. Mark, it's right in the center of our screen. And just hold her steady. It's really looking good.
Oh my God, look at that picture over there. There's the Earth coming up. Wow, is that pretty. Hey, don't take that, it's not scheduled. You got a color film, Jim? Hand me a roll of color, quick.
Oh
will you?
man, that's
Hurry.
great. Where is it?
Quick.
Gee, down here?
Just grab me a color. A color exterior. Hurry up.
That one?
Yeah, I'm looking for one.
C368.
Anything, quick.
Here.
What? Looks like we missed it.
Hey, I got it right here.
Let me get up this way. It's a lot clearer.
Bill, I got it framed. It's very clear right here. Got it?
Moon is a different thing to each one of us. I think that each one carries his own impressions of what he's seen today. I know my own impression is that it's a vast, lonely, forbidding type existence or expanse of nothing. It looks rather like clouds and clouds of pumice stone. And it certainly would not appear to be a very inviting place to live or work. Jim, what have you thought most about?
Well, Frank, my thoughts were very similar. The vast loneliness up here on the moon is awe-inspiring, and it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth. The Earth from here is a grand oasis of the big vastness of space.
Bill, what do you think? I think the thing that impressed me the most were the lunar sunrises and sunsets. These in particular bring out the stark nature of the terrain, and the long shadows really bring out the relief that is here and hard to see in this very bright surface that we're going over right now. We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep.
and God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
Heavens Above is a great source of information for printed star maps for your area, for your time, satellite sightings, comets. It's just a great source. The next What's Up is going to be on January 3rd, 2024. It's a Wednesday at 7:30. Our next regular meeting of the RASC Edmonton will be on December 11th, and you can attend in person at the Ziedler Dome or catch it online. The Zoom link will be on our website. And a reminder, tomorrow, if you're thinking of buying a telescope, myself and Clayton Noel are going to be presenting a how to buy a telescope. This is a Zoom meeting. We used to do it live, but since the pandemic, we've done it on Zoom for the last few years. So that's tomorrow at 7:00. And with that, I will say thank you. And if there are any questions, or comments, I'll take them now. Oh, just for information, the bit with the Earthrise, that movie is actually from Apollo 10. There was no movie taken on Apollo 8. It caught them quite by surprise. But Apollo 10, because again, watching the landing site for Apollo 11, the lighting was exactly the same and the Earth would have looked exactly the same. So I used that movie. And I also threw in a little clip from Earth to the Moon of the command module flying toward it. So that's where that came from.
I got pins and needles, shivers watching that and listening to that.
Yeah, it's I remember it well. I mean, it was Christmas and you're out of school. You could see everything. All the broadcasts were carried live on TV. I mean, they would just interrupt the program and say, here's another broadcast, and we would watch it and just kind of whoop, wow. I got a cassette recorder for Christmas that year, so I thought I was really, really big stuff. I got a cassette tape recorder, because they were still fairly new back then. So, anything else?
I had a question about that ship, but you already answered it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
On that moonrise.
Yeah. That's from the Earth to the Moon. A very excellent miniseries.
For those watching, the Observer's calendar will be all these very nice information about what's up in the sky is going to be available at the upcoming meeting. And it's the price is set at $25, so a $3 savings from if you were ordering it online and getting it via the mail.
Okay. Anything else? No. Okay. Well, thank you once again. I'm just going to put on my Santa hat here, because it is that time of year, and wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, a happy Festivus, a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll see you in the new year. So, and thanks, Alistair, for helping out. And so
easy when you're in control.
Okay. All right. Okay. Ho, 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 and I'll say goodnight.
Right.
Good night, everyone.